Hi.
Hi, Dr. Hudson.
Hey, how are you?
Keisha,
Hey, how you
Tasha.
been?
Good. It's good to see you.
Good to see you. I'm excited about today's conference. I couldn't miss it.
Oh, good.
All right.
Okay, so Bianca, if it's okay, I'll do a quick introduction and then let you take over for a little bit, and then I'll join back in with my slides. Okay?
Great.
All right. So first of all, I just want to thank Bianca for inviting me to present with her on this topic. I don't know, Bianca, if you knew I had an interest before. You asked if I'd like to do it with you, but it was so timely because at the time she was asking me, I was preparing to do a presentation on the topic of self-care at a local school in an urban area to parents who were for their family night. They do a family night where they invite all of the parents and the children in the school to come in and have dinner and to hear a presentation. And so I was invited to speak on self-care and ACEs in the African American community. And so Bianca happened to kind of reach out at the same time. So it just kind of all worked out. So I just wanted to publicly acknowledge her and say thank you for allowing me to join you in this presentation. All right, do you want to introduce yourself and then I will start the slides?
Yes, I am Bianca Johnson. I am currently in my last year of the Chicago School. I'm so excited. And the topic, self-care in the African American community, is really important to me because when I first got here, I had no idea what self-care was. I went to a HBCU where our version of self-care was parties and, meeting new people and, alcohol. So the idea of finding ways to take care of yourself was a little bit foreign to me. So it really, really struck my interest. Just seeing how people from various upbringings and different racial backgrounds conduct themselves and know how to not only take care of the day-to-day things that they have to do, but things like their mental well-being and their emotional state of mind. So I really felt like that was important to not only African Americans, but everybody in general, just to know how important self-care was. Go to the next slide.
I clicked in her, hold on. There we go.
So I found that it was very important within the African American community because due to some unmet needs within the African American community, such as, not having any gyms or not having places to do yoga, not having grocery stores within the area that we live in. All of these things can really impact not only your physical health, but your mental health. And in the African American community, we see this at a much higher percentage. African Americans are really much more likely to experience serious mental health situations due to some situations such as racial violence and other kinds of violence. It really can take a toll on the mental state of African Americans in general. Things such as slavery, racism, low income neighborhoods, lack of proper nutrition, and healthcare can all really play a role in how mental health can be damaged if not taken care of properly.
Okay, so as I was saying, when Bianca asked me about doing this presentation, I was also talking about ACEs. And I know that throughout the conference you've heard much about ACEs from in many different areas. And so in my discussion with you all today, I'm going to take a different approach because I really kind of want to share with you how for me, I find this to be very significant, not only to my community, but to kind of just understanding ACEs overall. And so I like to share the story about how it began, how the ACEs study took off. And I don't know if you guys are familiar with how that all happened. But Dr. Vincent Folletti, he was working at Kaiser Palomento, and he was in charge of the preventive medicine, and specifically, he was overseeing the weight loss clinic, and it was a very large weight loss clinic, and they had been having success and getting people to lose a substantial amount of weight. The problem that he was finding is that he wasn't able to get the people to stick around. So they would begin to have this progress, they began to see the weight come off, and then they would drop out of the program. And so it was very frustrating to him. And so he talks particularly about one woman who had weighed 400 pounds when she started. In 1 year, she lost 300 pounds, and she did that in a way that was healthy. You know, it was medically supervised. And he says that in 3 weeks, she had gained back almost 40 pounds. He thought that was medically impossible. So when he began to talk to her about kind of what was different, what was happening, she couldn't explain it. She said to him that, you know, when she was a child, she used to sleepwalk. Maybe she's eating in her sleep. And for him as a doctor, he was like, okay, I hear you, but I don't understand how you would gain that much weight. So he asked her about kind of what had changed in her life from the time she had began losing the weight and the time that she began to put the weight back on. And so she explained that she was beginning to get more attention at work and some attention from some of her male colleagues about how good she was looking. And so she thinks that might have had impact her ability to kind of keep the weight off, that, you know, because she was abused as a child and, you know, that attention made her really uncomfortable. Now, as a medical doctor in the 90s, he didn't understand how that could be related. He had a hard time being convinced that the attention she was receiving at work was impacting her eating habits. And so as he was pondering over this client, and he sat down with another client to do an assessment, during the assessment, he meant to ask the client about when was her first menstrual cycle. And so what he asked her and said was, when was her first, I don't know exactly the wording, I can't remember, but I think it was like her first experience or first sexual intercourse or something like that. And so the client said back to him when she was 4 years old, her uncle raped her. And so for him, not thinking that sexual abuse was as prevalent as it was, began to look at kind of other factors. Like, how is this, are there other people in the clinic that are dropping out of these studies or not having the success they have? Are they experiencing some of those same negative experiences in childhood? And so as he was presenting some of this to, nationally, and he presented at the CDC, where Dr. Robert Anda was at the time, he was also an internist, so he's in internal medicine, and he was working with veterans. So this piqued his interest because what he was feeling like was that by the time he got to his work with veterans, that it was a little too, a little too late. So the idea for him was that what he was doing to help them with diabetes and high blood pressure really needed to start early. And so when they began to have these conversations about things in their childhood, he recognized that the veterans had had a lot of experience with divorce, single parent households, other what he calls household dysfunctions that were occurring. And so the two got together and decided to do this massive study. They spoke to over 26,000 clients that were actually being seen at Kaiser Permanente, and actually has over 1,700 participants. So the makeup of the study was 80% whites, including Hispanic, 10% Black, and 10% Asian. And I noted here that that's about 1,700 Blacks. And so this was a middle-class group. So all of the participants were from middle-class families. And so they specifically, 78% of the participants had attended college, and 44% had graduated. So this is really looking at a group of people that were not necessarily in poverty, not necessarily, having all of the challenge that you would expect them to have with that social economic status. Okay, so I want to share with you the actual questionnaire, and then we'll get back to how this relates to African American community. Okay, so if you go to, and I'm going to just show you the website really quick. Okay, so if you go to the CDC's website, you can get the full version of the questionnaires that were used in the actual study. And then you can also read the article. This is the article here, the ACEs article. Now,
it's not coming up, Dr. Hudson.
Oh, you can't see it? Can you guys see the website at all?
No, you might need,
Oh, maybe I'm just sharing. Okay, hold on. Let me see. Maybe I'm just sharing the PowerPoint and I'm
yeah,
not sharing my screen.
I always forget that too.
Yeah. Okay, can you see my screen?
Yeah, we can see you're sharing, it says you're sharing your screen. There
Okay.
you go. Now we
Okay,
can.
great. Okay, so this is the CDC's website, and in here, like I said, they have all of the information on the ACEs study. So there's a pyramid that goes along with the ACEs study. I'm not going to get into that now, but here are the questionnaires that they use. So there was a health appraisal questionnaire and a family history questionnaire. These are the long versions. So what has happened since then is that people have pulled out of these longer versions, and I'm going to show you. Yeah, here we go. Sorry. Okay, so here is a shorter form. So this is like the 10 specific ACEs questions that come from the study. So I'm going to make this available to all of you, as well as you'll have that long version, so that you can kind of look and determine your own ACEs score. And so, as you see, the first few questions really have to do with with the abuse. Like I said, there's two parts to the ACEs study. There is household dysfunctions and abuse, sexual abuse, physical abuse, and mental abuse. And so the questions are all related to that. So the first ones are about, did your parents or any adult in the household swear at you, insult you? Were you grabbed, slapped, pushed? Were you fondled, touched? And then, did you feel like your family loved you? Were you important or special? How often did you have enough to eat? Had you wore dirty clothes? Were your parents separated or divorced? So there's other questions. There's questions about drug use and alcohol use, and then mental health within the household, and also a question about if a member of the household had gone to prison. So the thing about the actual questionnaire that the researchers noted is that it is an overall idea of the categories. So for instance, if you had one experience where, let's say, your father slapped you because you were getting smart with him, but then you were never hit again, that would count the same as if someone had been constantly abused for a specific period of time. So what the researchers are saying is that they think, even with the estimates that they've made, that maybe they've under scored how prevalent things are within the community. Okay. Okay. So just so you guys have an idea, they found that more than 25% grew up in a household with alcohol or drug use. 25% had been beaten as a child. 2/3 had at least one adverse childhood experience, and 1 in 6 had 4 or more. I thought I heard somebody. Was there a question or a comment? Okay. All right, so this is just kind of another look at kind of the categories. And one thing that I think is interesting and that I think is really relevant to the African American community is that they found that children had more of an adverse effect when parents were divorced than if a parent was lost by death. And so, as I pondered on that, and here's kind of how I think that, this is my idea. I don't have any research to back this up. But the way I see it is that, we tend to love kids who lose a parent. We surround them with love. We do what we can to kind of support them, to let them know that they're cared for. But when kids have parents who either separate, maybe they're not married and they've been together for a while and they decide to end that relationship, or parents that divorce, we don't tend to give them that same amount of love, affection, and attention. And so I think that might be even more prevalent in the African American community. And just using like my own life as kind of an idea about what that looks like. When I was 13, my best friend lost her father. He died of a heart attack. It was very unexpected. And the community, we had a very small community. So I graduated with about, I think it was like 48 of us that graduated together. So very small community, knew everyone. She received so much love and support. I mean, the teachers in the school, everyone just gave her so much attention. Let her know that they were there for her if she needed anything. She got special privileges to assist them in their classes. Just really surrounded her with love. About that same time, I had another friend whose parents separated. They weren't married, but they lived together. And the parents decided that they weren't going to be together anymore. Dad stayed in her life for about 6 months at the end of the relationship and then kind of just faded away. She received none of that. If anything, she received more from family and friends. It's a good thing he's gone. He wasn't worth anything anyway. Now you can move on and all of that. So really, I think that might be one of the reasons why we see this discrepancy and loss of a parent through divorce or separation than if a parent was lost through death.
I can definitely relate to that because my parents were separated majority of my life, but we were kind of taught to sweep it under the rug. Like, we don't talk about what happened or we don't talk about our emotions. And a lot of African Americans grow up that way when something happens or, a friend gets locked up or, one of your friends dies because of violence within the neighborhood. It's really nothing that you talk about. It's really just something that you go out and you party it off. And then the next day it's over with. So I think that's really a really good point because it's a problem within the African American community that we don't process situations the way that we should.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Bianca. I appreciate that. So I'm going to try to move along here. I don't want to take up too much time. I want Bianca to get to her portion as well. And then the way Bianca and I approached our presentation was that it was a call for action. So we don't have answers. We have more of a time where we're going to spend just kind of processing what we can do to improve self-care within the community. So I want to make sure that we give ourselves enough time to do that as well. Okay, so this is kind of the impact on ACEs. So in the beginning, during childhood, we see neurobiological effects, so brain abnormal. I can't talk sometimes, this late, all day long, I need to slow down. Okay, so brain abnormalities, stress hormone deregulation. We see psychosocial effects, poor attachment, poor socialization, poor self-efficacy. And then we see health behavior risks. So as, this is kind of in adolescence. So smoking, obesity, substance abuse, promiscuity. And then long-term effects are more of the things that you see as these children become adults and across the lifespan. So we see mental illness, drug use, heart disease, intergenerational transmission of abuse. We see social problems, homelessness, criminal behavior, prostitution, work challenges, unemployment. And with work challenges, some of what we see is the inability to be consistent about attendance. We see challenges getting the work done while they're there. And then, of course, we see unemployment as it's related to not being able to do the job. And then challenges with parenting and shorter lifespans. So one thing I want you to consider in terms of the African American community is that if it was hard for Dr. Ferlenti and other physicians to see how these things that happened in childhood could impact what happened to someone in their adult life, it's hard for us to convince the people within the community that this is taking place. Like I said, I just recently did a presentation with parents, and part of the reason that the school invited me was because was the way that parents were disciplining their children, and the use of whippings, and the way that we continue to talk to our children in the community was having an effect on their behavior at school. And so what I said to them is, I will come in and I'm going to talk to them about self-care. And then we can discuss some of these things as part of that, but I'm not going to come in and tell them to stop doing something because, first of all, they're not going to listen to me. And second of all, I need for them to gain some trust that I know what I'm talking about before I can help them to begin to change those behaviors that have been ingrained in us for generation after generation after generation. And so it's a process. So one thing that I'm doing now is I'm holding a mom's group, where I'm beginning the process to help them to develop some ideas of what self-care can look like in a way of helping them to better parent their children. So it's going to take some time for us to get there. Bianca, I think I have like one or two more slides and then you can move on. All right, so ACEs in the African American community. I really thought some of these statistics were very interesting. As you know, in the 2010 census, about 25.9% of African Americans live below the poverty level. Drug usage within the community is lower than for the African American population than the white counterparts. However, the negative impact of these substance use is much higher. Diabetes is 60% more common than white Americans. Heart disease, I just put the men up here. 42% of black men are diagnosed with high blood pressure at the age of 20 or older. And I think it was about 54% of black women. Cancer, now the rate of cancer isn't necessarily higher in the African American community, but the death rate is. So that's something else that we have to think about. And then other challenges that was actually noted in this study is, the number of single-parent homes, the high incarceration rate, and the physical and sexual abuse. And then Graham related to epigenetics. He related it to generational racism and ACEs within our community. And so I am going to turn it over to Bianca to talk a little bit about these negative coping mechanisms.
Negative coping. So, like I stated earlier, we tend to not have any guidance as far as how we deal with certain things, whether it's tragedy or day-to-day stress, work stress, relationship stress. We don't have any knowledge about how to cope with certain things like that. When I was doing my research, I found out that mental health can affect, choices that we make on a day-to-day basis, which can involve sexual health, how often you have sex, how frequently. Do you use protection? Do you not use protection? Which can also speak on the amount of unplanned pregnancies that may occur within our community, which is really a problem. So a lot of things that we make choices on, depending on the state of our mental health, can really play a role, which I think is very important. Additionally, I think that strain is associated with negative emotional states. So emotions that you may experience, such as anger or anxiety or frustration, sadness, confusion, all of these things can have an increase in delinquent behavior. So say, for example, I'm stressed because I started a new job and I'm so anxious and I have all these reports due. I may get off and drink every day, or I may get off and, have unprotected sex a lot more frequently than I would if I was under a lower amount of stress. So things that occur in our lives are really important to consider when we're talking about coping mechanisms, because some of us really have negative coping mechanisms, and it's important to try to find positive ways to deal with your stress on a day-to-day basis. I also found in some of my research that social stressors and psychological distress are really correlated with the use of drugs and alcohol, which I find to personally be a fact. I know I stated earlier I went to a HBCU. So whenever we were stressed, whoever it was, we would do, things to cope with it. We would never talk about how we felt. So whether it would be go to a party or stay up all night and not handle our responsibilities, we would find other avenues to deal with things rather than do it in a healthy way, whether it's go bike riding or take a hike or write in a journal. You will really see that a lot of negative coping mechanisms are amounted to the amount of stress that you have in your life. So stigmas surrounding mental health. First, I wanted to define stigma, which refers to a collection of negative attitudes, beliefs, thoughts, and behaviors that influence the individual or the general public to fear, reject, avoid, to be prejudiced, and discriminate against people with mental disorders. In the African American community, we really don't believe in mental health. A lot of us don't seek counseling. A lot of us don't believe that counseling is needed, and that's really based on how we grew up. Some from a family point of view, but some really based on religion. I know I grew up in a Christian background, so we were taught to pray about it and it would go away. We also were taught that whatever happens in the house stays in the house. So we grew up with all of these rules and all of these ideas of how to handle our mental health that we were never taught anything positive. Many people who even seek out mental health help, such as therapy or counseling, nine times out of 10 don't finish them because of the fear of being judged by other people. Or what if my friends find out? Or what if my family knows that I'm, seeking counseling? How would they feel? What if I have to take medication? Is that a lifetime sentence? Do I have to take medication for the rest of my life? These are all the things that internally go on in people's minds when it comes to mental health and what that really entails. So I think the lack of knowledge surrounding mental health is very important if we want to start implementing some self-care techniques within the community. So exploring self-care. I want to start off by saying that when I first got here, I had no idea what self-care was. Um, I had some negative coping mechanisms of myself, and I remember I took CM 500 and we had to write SMART goals. And I'm like, what is a SMART goal? What does this mean? So we had to do one for professionalism, one for studying, and then one for self-care. So it took me maybe a good 1.5 weeks to really figure out, okay, what is self-care? What does that mean to me? What will really help me throughout this process? And I think that that's important to really sit and think because self-care doesn't look the same for everyone. Self-care is usually something that is positive, that helps you maintain life in a sense of balance. So it can be something like yoga or exercising frequently or journaling or, watch like blocking some time out to watch your favorite show. These are all examples of self-care. I think that the lack of resources within the African American community is an issue when it comes to trying to implement self-care. We don't really see a lot of yoga centers or boxing facilities or even things involving what you eat. We don't have as many grocery stores that offer fresh fruit or organic foods, so that can really take an impact on what we need for our self-care. Just anything in general, we really see a lot of liquor stores or clubs or things of that nature that really don't aid to what we need in our mental health life.
Okay, so as Bianca and I were talking, and I don't even know if I shared the boxing class with you, Bianca. I was thinking about this after the last time we met. I think one thing that we can do is try to find creative ways to begin addressing or introducing self-care within the community. I think Bianca's absolutely right. I don't know about many of you, but self-care was never a topic in my household. My parents were hard workers, and that was the example that they set. Work hard, you'll get where you want to go. So my mom easily worked 12-hour days, 6 days a week, and that's what I saw. My dad did the same. I mean, there were some days where when I was growing up, I didn't even see my parents because they were working. The understanding was just that I was going to do what I needed to do. I had a younger sister, and so my role was then to be to kind of step into that role of parent at the house. And so for me, self-care wasn't something that I even understood or knew about until I got much older. And so I don't think that's unusual. I think that that's pretty common for our community, in the African American community, the idea of talking about, even today, when I did my presentation and I mentioned self-care, they laughed at me, which was okay. It wasn't a big deal. Part of it was because it was just so unfamiliar to them. That's not something that we do. I'm not self-care. I had too much other things to do. They don't really see the value. So part of my role and my job is to help them to see the value and how it can help them to change their life, their work life, their home life, the relationship with their children, and all of that. So I want to just take a moment to kind of tell you guys a couple of stories about kind of self-care. So when I was, oh gosh, I was in my early 20s and just really kind of beginning the counseling field. Where I worked, my supervisor, my director of the counseling services, had just started taking boxing classes at a gym, and she loved it. And so she came back with this idea that maybe we should introduce boxing classes to some of the women who were survivors of sexual assault. And so this is predominantly an African American community mental health center. And so we didn't advertise it as group. We advertised it as a boxing class that they would do in a gym for free. They did not have to pay for the class. We got the owner of the gym to actually agree to run the class with us. And then after the class, we would sit down and we do like maybe a 30-minute group. So it was amazing the impact of just that hour a day, 2 times a week had on these women. So they had the physical changes in their body. We had women from 18 to 65, and my 65-year-old client could do 1,000 crunches with no problem by the time we were done with our group. So they saw the changes in their physical body. They felt empowered, and they began to see how it was relieving the stress in their lives. So we approached it in a little bit of a different way. We didn't necessarily go in talking about the need for self-care. The idea with the boxing class, just so you know, was never for them to, because this was a concern of ours, that they would begin to envision their perpetrator while they were hitting the bags, and they never hit each other. So there was never like an actual, boxing match or whatever. I don't know what it's called. But it was just really the idea that they had, also it was that they had the time to spend with each other. So then they were building those connections within the community as well, those support systems. And so it was just phenomenal for me to kind of see the changes that were occurring in these women by the simple act of doing something that was a little bit different. And then I already mentioned my mom's group. Right now I am currently starting a mom's group for and it's not just moms, it's grandparents as well, of the children that attend the school that I'm working with. It is a school in the inner city, a very impoverished neighborhood, and I'm not going in there. Well, so I approached my my group in this way. I was born and raised in the community in which I live now. So within the Dayton, Ohio area. I don't live in the same community that I grew up in, but it was right maybe 10 minutes from where this school is. And so I talked to them about kind of where I'm from. My husband, however, grew up around the corner for the school, so he grew up in a very impoverished neighborhood. So I talked to them about him and and then when we first got married, his grandmother had passed away and she had given him a house, which was, I think it's about 3 blocks away from where the school is now. So I lived in the community for a period of time. So I talked to them about kind of, understanding where they are. Trying to meet them where they are and to build trust, that I'm not someone from outside the community that's coming in and telling them what they need to do. Instead, I'm trying to approach it as, I see the challenges, I know the challenges, and you can do it. And so, I have had a couple of parents who really appreciated the talk that I gave, and I'm kind of doing a little bit of coaching with them now, which has been great. And then the group, I've had a lot of people sign up for the group. I haven't actually started the group yet. That starts in next week or the week after. And so I'm excited about that, and I can let you guys know how that's going. And then the other thing I wanted to talk to you about, creative ways of introducing or approaching self-care, is with the collaboration with a personal trainer that I used to participate in. I haven't done it in a while. It's called Women Working Out. And so it's done in a rec center within the inner city. And the personal trainer is an African-American woman who just has a passion for changing the physical health of people within the community. And so she and I and another friend got together about creating these groups where we can build, of course, they can address the physical health. We can take time to talk and address mental health. And then we can also kind of just be a support for one another when we're met with challenges in both areas. And so that has been phenomenal. She still does it. I've kind of stepped away because I've just been so busy. My friend is still actively involved in it, and they still have a ton of women who are interested and participate each week. Bianca, you wanna present our questions?
So, Miss Dr. Hudson has a lot of things that she has going on, but I feel like I need to advocate within my own community because we have nothing. And it started getting me thinking, what can we as mental health professionals do to advocate for certain things that we don't have in these African American communities? What is our role in this whole situation? Do we advocate for gyms, or do we advocate for fresh foods? What are the steps that we should take when it comes to not only advocating for these places, but trying to break down these negative stigmas within mental health in general?
I think, from my conversations with Bianca, we don't necessarily have answers, but we're hoping that as a community that really share this interest and this passion for changing the lives of this population, that maybe we can come up with some ideas that we can even begin now. Some ways that we can kind of begin to act to help and assist and create a more of an environment where self-care is appreciated and valued. And so we're coming to you with just ideas. We just love for you to share, like maybe even some challenges, how we might be able to address them, maybe what you have found in your own process of developing self-care plans, the challenges you were faced with, and kind of what you've done. So I'm going to stop sharing, and then if you guys would join us on screen, that would be great.
I think first it starts with just getting the information out there to people. Just a lot of people don't know about mental health. So I guess like just getting the information out there to people, making them more aware, maybe having like workshops and stuff.
Lene, I really like that. So can I ask you about your own self-care and kind of what you've done or the challenges you've experienced?
Sure. It's not good at all. I'm like always want to go, always doing something. So I would say that it's not good, but recently I've just been like trying to get back into it, whether it's just laying down or like watching a TV show.
Hello?
Hi, Giovanni.
Hey. I think for me for me in my community, one of the things that I really kind of decided very early is uh, about my physical health, and I guess the more and more I get into exercising and all that, and just taking care of my mind and body, is just kind of lead by example, I guess. Apply what I'm learning to my life. Therefore, I can say if it happens to be, telling a client or helping them see a different perspective or my perspective and how things have worked out for something that that I would like them to kind of, if they would be interested in trying out, to just give myself as an example.
Okay, wonderful.
I
Right.
definitely can relate to that, Giovanni, because when I started, I wasn't doing anything to better myself. No working out, no eating healthy. But I started yoga recently. Spent about a couple of months, and I started meditating on and off. So I just feel like if you don't experience at least once the things that you are pushing onto your clients or your future clients, you really can't expect them to try. I think that yoga now is amazing. I think that meditation is a great way to combat anxiety and depression, and I really try to advocate that with my friends whenever they're going through something, just to give them a different avenue to take out their stress. So I definitely agree with that.
What about others? What's self-care like for you?
I wasn't going to talk from the lens of myself, but last week I had the opportunity to work with a young person that was in the agency that I work for. I work at a homeless agency, and two of our young people kind of were having a verbal altercation, and the young man realized that he just needed to go. So prior, he had been incarcerated and things for some assaults and things like that. But he just kind of approached me. He's like, I need to go. And we just kind of organized a safety plan. And as that was occurring, we just kind of talked it through. And as we were talking it through, I said to him, I'm so proud that you're recognizing all of these things and doing it so differently. And in the moment of all of this crisis, he stopped and he was like, what did you just say? And I said, I'm really proud of you for recognizing all of these things and doing it differently. And he was like, nobody has ever said that to me before. So that was really impactful for me in working with young people. Just kind of those small words. And then we had gone downstairs where we have a fitness center, and I held the punching bag, and it was a little scary, I'll say that. And he was hitting it. Like, I was like, okay, I'm going to take off my earrings. I'm going to take this off, and you can do this. But we kind of bonded. And so now I have the opportunity to also work with him in the community. But just kind of recognizing and really taking those steps and saying, hey, I'm super proud of you for making these amazing steps, and recognizing that right now you can't be in this space so that you don't repeat what you've done before.
Thank you for sharing that, Heidi. Okay, I want to share a little bit about from the chat, because we have a lot of comments on Bianca.
Well, while you're looking at that, Denita, I wanted to mention something too. Something that Bianca said at the beginning of the session just really struck something that has been a trigger for me for a while. And that is that, I live near one of the largest cities in North Carolina. It also has one of the poorest communities in it. In what is the poorest community? Southeast Raleigh is the poorest community in North Carolina. And, about 8 years ago, the only grocery store in the downtown area closed. And now people in that community have to, go, 10, 12 miles to get to a grocery store that is what I would say reasonable. There's a Whole Foods near NC State, but they can't afford that, right? And the Whole Check, not Whole Foods. But now parts of Raleigh are being gentrified. And now they're talking about moving a grocery store into the community, but it's going to be a Whole Foods-like store. And again, it's a store that's so outside the possibilities of so many of the community members that they can't, it's just, there might as well not even be a store there. And I don't know, one of the things that I think is really important is that counselors take a step back and take time to really examine the communities that they're serving, because you can't assume. I live in a community that I can literally walk to a grocery store, within, 15, 20 minutes, and these are families that are having to walk just incredible and take the transit system, and just incredible obstacles they have to overcome just to get food.
Along those lines, too, Dr. L.A., the interesting piece is I grew up in high school. I lived in the suburbs around some pretty affluent people. But when I was a kid, we went from one extreme to the other. So we used to joke and say we went from Good Times to the Jefferson, because it was a huge extreme. When we lived in the poor area, you still took the bus and went to the rich area to get your food because it was fresh. So right. Even if you went to that one store that was kind of close by, as soon as you walked in, you could smell bleach. Bleach is not the smell of the grocery store. Bleach is the smell of disguise. So you knew not to shop there. So when we moved, we actually moved closer to where the grocery store was when I was 14. So those first, 14 years of life, you had to travel to get food that wouldn't make you sick or grow it yourself.
That's funny that you said that you moved to a grocery store, because that's the first thing I did when I moved to Baltimore, because in DC we had grocery stores were far. Like we had to maybe drive 20, 30 minutes to get to a okay area. So the first thing I did when I moved to Baltimore and got my apartment, I moved right next door to a grocery store, because I was never used to having access to a grocery store. And that's huge.
It impacts, right, Bianca, the behaviors of your adulthood. I grew up in a situation where food was not a regularity. And so, now I have overstocked pantries. And people look at me kind of funny because I have so much food, but I've been hungry. I know what it means to not have food. And so that impacts who I am and how I raise my own children and things like that. And it's important to understand that these are lasting impacts. The individuals that I serve in the Southeast community, they live off junk food because that's what they can afford. And it's also what will be, they can't buy fresh stuff when it's 98 degrees outside and they're walking 5, 6, 7 miles in the heat with their food. The food will be spoiled or mashed or mushed by the time they get it home. And so you really have to understand that context. It's Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It's totally Maslow's hierarchy of needs. You have to really think about, are they safe? Are they getting their basic needs met? Because if they're not, there's no sense in engaging in those other levels.
One of my personal models, and this has been kind of the model that I've lived, well, I guess from my adult life, because it's kind of been trained in me, is to find a need and endeavor to meet it. So when I notice that there's something going on within my community, it's automatic for me. I start thinking about what can we do? How can we help to either solve the problem, impact the problem? And so this for me is one of those areas where I'm attempting to do what I can with what I have, but I feel like I need to do more. And so I guess I'm calling on all of you to begin that process as well. Like, what can we do as professionals, as people, as members of the community, or people who work within the community? What can we do to kind of change this for the members of that community and help them to have better lives, to have more opportunity, to have better access to food? I agree with what Dr. Stretch was saying, that, we'll never be able to get them to see the value of mental health counseling if we can't first help them to be able to address some of these other areas as well. What are your thoughts?
So this is Desireen. I'm just wondering, the issue is probably compounded. Is it more than issues of food?
So basically, what Dr. LA was saying was that we can't really expect to tackle people not having good mental health care when they're not even getting their basic needs met. So things like food and housing and proper schools and things of that nature are things that they tackle every day. So they really don't have time or proper space to worry about, oh, I'm depressed and I'm anxious and, I'm stressed, because they're not able to survive off of what they're getting. In the end, growing up, it ends up being unhealthy for your mental health, because you grow up in these situations and you grow up not knowing how to take care of your mental health because you were never taught, because you didn't have the time, because you didn't have the things that you needed, like food and water and housing or whatever. So it is a layered situation, I think. It's definitely layered.
Well, and then you add in the systemic discrimination, the historic, racism. You bring in all of these other components that are perpetuating these cycles. And then people look at them and say, well, why can't they just, get a good job? Or why can't they just, NC State's right down the street. Why can't they just get a good education? And I'm thinking, they don't have time to go to school. They're trying to get groceries, and it's just like, it's frustrating when people don't see the whole context in which individuals live. Because as helpers, we have to help the whole person, not just one aspect of them.
Thank you. I agree. I was wondering about, in terms of just what can we do, as developing counselors or in the community. I think you have to tackle it from sort of a multi-pronged approach, because not everyone is struggling with food issues, correct? So I think you look at it from sort of multiple places. So perhaps we can have like an awareness campaign, early intervention, maybe in Head Start programs or things like that. Raise this issue of self-care to get the message across, because I think you have to start early with something like this. At least that's what I'm thinking. I'm not sure I'm on the right track, but I see this.
I definitely agree. I saw something interesting on Facebook the other day about how schools in Baltimore were implementing meditation as
Right.
a form of in-school suspension, kind of. So instead of sending them home and not being able to eat because maybe they don't have food at home and not being able to get their education, they instead make them do an hour of meditation, which I think is really awesome. So finding ways to tackle more than one issue sometimes can be hard, but I think it's definitely possible.
I have something I'd like to add. My name is Constance, and I've always had this vision of opening a center, because my children have grown up in the theater, and the children's theater that they were a part of, there's a lot of children that are from the inner city, or, that have talents that are not being cultivated. And so, I would love to have a center opened where their gifts and their talents can be utilized, and they would have a creative outlet, and also incorporate that mindfulness, those mindfulness moments where they're able to really focus on their emotions, learn how to deal with those better, but also they're in a environment where their gifts are being fostered. What do you think about that?
I think it's a great idea. Yeah,
Thank
absolutely.
you.
Yeah. I think that one thing that, at least I can only talk about my area, but collaboration with other centers here is not what it could be. I would love to see us do a better job working together to address some of these needs, versus feeling like we have to work separately. And I don't know if it's like that all over the country, or if it's like that in your neighborhood with community mental health and other agencies. But I do think that doesn't do anything but make this a larger challenge for everyone, that if we were willing to work together. Jennifer had posted in the chat about offering farmers markets as a way of providing fresh produce. And I could see us doing that in combination with, okay, so here's fresh food. Here are some options of things you can do to take care of your health, physical health, mental health, as a way of addressing like the whole person, instead of just, okay, I'm going to do this and you're going to do that, and I'll make sure that when I do this, it doesn't conflict with the time that you're going to do that. And so I think that's something else that we need to kind of consider, is how we can work together to begin to kind of address some of these needs. Any other thoughts?
I had a question. So when working with individuals who are sort of in need of these greater resources, they are working really, it seems like, from a deficit, because not only are they not having their needs met, they're also not able to focus on the self-care that's going to help them be able to fight these larger fights. So it kind of, so I guess my question is, when we are seeing them one-on-one in a counseling setting, how do we have that conversation with them to help them understand the importance of this, when it can so easily come across as being just completely out of touch, if that makes sense?
Bianca, do you want to try to address it?
I think that myself, I would probably tackle the bigger issues first, depending on what they need, whether it's housing or food or something of that nature, any kind of abuse that's happening. I think that always giving the knowledge of self-care techniques is important, no matter what anyone is going through, just to give them a different avenue to take. I wouldn't say that it's out of touch. I would say that I think that it's a problem of recognizing that there's a problem, and, okay, I don't have food, but, here's some food stamps. But let's talk about, how does that make you feel to be starving for a year plus with no food? How does that really make you feel? Because no one really asks those kind of questions. So I think that tackling the issues, but still opening up a free space for someone to feel confident enough to talk about how certain things makes them feel is important as well. So I guess it's kind of trying to find a balance between the two.
Yeah, I really like that answer. Ivy, I think another thing that I'd like for you to consider, and I don't know where you are as far as like with your internship and practicum and kind of the area where you're working. But, I do think that when you have clients who begin to trust you and they can begin to share some of the things that Bianca's talking about. You can begin to kind of talk to them about tools. And a lot of times you have to sell it. You have to kind of show that you believe in it and that, you really believe if they try it, it'll be helpful to them, and just keep after them to do it. And it really does help. I can tell you many times that I've had clients that said, there's no way I'm doing that. That's for white people. That's not for me. And so I say, well, how do you know unless you try it, And so I tell them a story. I use like little stories. Like my son, he used to like bananas and ketchup. And so I tell the story all the time. That sounds disgusting to me. And so I know when one time when he was eating it, and I was like, I can't even watch you eat that. That's so disgusting. He was like, how do you know unless you try it? And so I stopped and thought, and, I talked to him about it. I was like, oh, you're right. I've never tried it. I'm not planning on trying it. But the idea was that he was absolutely right. I'm here saying how horrible this thing is, and I don't even know what it tastes like. And so I use that as an example sometimes in counseling, just to get them to understand that trying something different may be the answer to all of their problems.
Okay, thank you. I think that those are really insightful. Just I think my own concern was coming across as here we need to tackle these big things, but also taking care of the individual, doing that self-care for the individual I think my fear was it might come across as, well, what does this clueless person know about these big struggles that we have? Wants me to stop and do deep breathing and yoga,
Yeah.
Well, I mean, and that's not to say that that person would want to do deep breathing and yoga. Everyone has different things that works for them. I wouldn't necessarily push just one or two main things on them. I think that trying to explore things with them and trying to figure out what keeps them calm, what helps them get motivated, these are things that you would try to explore with them to try to find some more positive avenues of decreasing their stress.
And then Ivy, I don't know if there's necessarily an answer that we could give you. I think it's kind of about, like Bianca saying, what the client's comfortable with, but also like you just trying something different. Like, maybe not having a conversation about self-care. I know, like I had at one of my offices that I used to work with, there was a pond, a really nice pond outside of the office that had a walking track around it. And there were many times with my African-American female clients, I did this with a lot of clients, but especially with them when they were coming in and they were overwhelmed, I would say, hey, you want to just do our session outside and just kind of walk a little bit? I didn't necessarily bring up the topic of self-care. What I did instead was present an opportunity for them to do something for themselves, and then talk to them about it afterward. Like, what was that like? Did you enjoy that? Wasn't it nice to kind of get outside? As a way of opening the door for those other conversations. So sometimes it's really about kind of how you approach things.
Thank you.
All right, we're almost out of time. Does anyone else have any questions or anything they just want to share?
This was great. That's it. Really good.
This was a great presentation. Enjoyed it.
Oh, good. I'm glad. I hope.
Awesome. Good job.
I hope we can continue the conversation, because I would love for our students to really begin the process, kind of how we can do something to change our communities. And so I know it's a big thing to tackle, but I would love for us to begin just having the conversation and figuring out what maybe we as a department, we as students within the department, what we could do to help. Okay. Dr. Ellie, I just want to take a moment to thank you for the opportunity for us to do this conference. And I just want to thank everyone for your participation and just kind of taking the time out of your day. I know some of you are very busy, and you just really kind of had to do this while you were doing other things. And I just appreciate you guys just coming in and participating and allowing us to share with you our thoughts and our research and our ideas.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So much.
All right. Well, hopefully we'll see you all next year for the second annual conference, right?
Thank you.
All right. Take care, everyone.
That was awesome.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Take care.